welcome tonight. Thank you for coming. I'm Mary Fellows, hosting this tonight. I come from a 20-year fashion background. I started at British Vogue. I've worked at 11 editions of Vogue. I launched one, the first in a Muslim country in Turkey. I've lived in New York and worked on digital content. I've dressed BAFTA winners and Oscar winners, including Olivia Colman, Scarlett Johansson, Julianne Moore. I've been an editor at The Economist. And now I've moved a little bit towards sustainability because I felt that I wasn't doing enough. And everything started just to smell a bit bad. So I thought during the pandemic I might sort of slightly pivot myself a bit. And when they asked me to do a show tonight about fashion, I said, can we call it Sex and Sustainability, the future of fashion? And I was given the green light, which I was really happy to hear about, because the panel I've got here are full of some of the best minds and thinkers and hearts in this movement. I say hearts because it does take passion as well as action. And we've got an amazing team here tonight. We'll start down the end with Sarah, who is about to drop next week as well. So thank you. Or tonight, yes. Any doctors in the room, put your hands up. So Sarah has recently announced a female-focused investment fund for women working in climate change or launching business around climate change. Prior to that, she's worked in education, design, innovation. Would you like to expand on that, Sarah?
So my background... absolutely. So my background is in material innovation. So I began as a textile designer. Went to Japan for a long time, developing materials for concept cars for Toyota. So worked in that sort of material innovation field, came back to the UK for a residency at the Design Museum and Innovation, and then founded my fashion brand, which I ran for a bit over a decade before really moving squarely into the field of sustainable innovation. And I now consult with a variety of startups in that space, and also with government, with the United Nations. Everything now about the work I do is about driving sustainable change. So. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you. And next along, we've got Jay Anderson, who was introduced to me a number of months ago and who now is my wing woman, partner in crime, the yin to my yang and the spreadsheet to my crazy colours in the business that we do. She is brilliantly outspoken, has worked her up through the system in New York and Texas, and says it like it is. And Jay, would you like to fill in the gaps?
The easiest thing, well, hey, y'all. So I don't want to be rude and not say hey. But yeah, for me, I think in regards to fashion, I've probably worked on each and every side of fashion that you could think of. I always tell people I'm your model's favorite model and your designer's most hated person to get an approval from. So when it comes to clothes, I know clothes because I know what it's like to be on either side. I know what it's like to think about them. I know what it's like to wear them. I know what it's like to sell them. And so I started out wanting to be the next Naomi Campbell. Then I said, I think I want to be the next, maybe Bill Gates. And how do I combine those things? And so that's what I've been doing, and that's what I work towards every single day. And for me, being more ethical and sustainable meant that I had to take a step back, and I saw how we made clothes, and I didn't like it. And it's either A, I can sit up here and go with the status quo, or B, do I step out and do something different? And for me, again, as Mary said, I'm outspoken, and I feel like I'm too crazy to ever be scared to fail. So whether I fall flat on my face or land 10 toes down, I'm gonna go for it. And that's what I do every day. And so, you know, I'm always here, and I'm always a resource to look at how things are being done and how can we do things better. So right. I could give you a rundown of all my educational pursuits, but no, I didn't like going to school anyway, so there's that.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Let's hear it for Jay. And next we've got the beautiful Lindsay Hanson, who is pioneering one of the things that makes me so excited about the future of sustainability, which is there's two elements to it, which is kind of the science and tech side, and then there's nature being kind of embraced for its circular systems and the way it doesn't waste anything. And on the science and tech side, we have people like Lindsay, who is pioneering this fabric that is going to be able to change colour. Is that right? That's one of the things you do.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a material designer, or that's at least what I'm calling myself now, but I'm not a material scientist. But what's interesting about my job is I have a background in fashion, and then I did a master's degree at Central St. Martin's in material futures, which is where I met my now business partner, Kosha Novoslov, who won the Nobel Prize for isolating graphene. So over the past few years, we've have been doing an R&D project of trying to actually was an idea that I had during my master's degree, but it was this concept of taking graphene and photonic crystals or liquid crystals, they're a structural color. It's a non-pigmented form of color, combining them together to hopefully one day make a color-changing fiber that would be ideally woven or knitted to make garments. So far, we've produced green, so we have a ways to go.
It's a good colour to
It's
start
not
with.
going to be
It's very
in
good.
next season, fall 2022, unfortunately.
It all starts somewhere, and thank you very much for joining us. And another what I would call mad scientist is my very, very long-standing friend, Nikki Kirkwood, who I've known since we both used to drink vodka at breakfast time at Philip Tracy's shop when we were both assistants. I was assisting Isabella Blow, who was a famous fashion icon on Philip's Muse, and Philip's a milliner, and Nick and I used to behave quite badly. And then here we are today doing our great things. And I always have thought of you as a bit of a mad scientist because you approach, I read somewhere that you approach things like a sculptor, which is true, and like an architect, and it is quite scientific the way that you design. And anyway, Nick has got his shoes in 150 stores worldwide. I'm sure many people in this room have got some. He's had 14 awards. Is that right? I think it's 14. I counted 14. I could be wrong.
Maybe my mum's counting as well.
Yeah, I mean your mum. The one award you've had twice, and the rest I shall leave up to you to fill in the gaps.
Well, thank you for that intro. So I set up my my brand in 2005, and I've been sort of experimenting with many different things. There's always new materials and new sort of silhouettes, and really the thing that sort of excites me right now is really the innovation that's kind of going into materials and the kind of massive challenges that the industry has. And I'm thinking really how can we, collectively, but it's also the brands also need to take the initiative to really sort of be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. And I think it's also easy to just get dragged along with it and just do the bare minimum. And I think that's not really enough. I think the fashion industry anyway is so incredibly backwards in many ways. So many other industries are so much more advanced in what they're doing. And it was kind of the same with the sort of the digital revolution as well. And fashion, I think, were the last people to stop using fax machines and actually having
fax machines.
and having actually transactionable websites.
Yeah.
And so I find. What I find inspiring is the challenge and is the absolute need for us to catch up, and we're starting from not a good place, and it's I think it's sort of time that we all step up and really make a real positive change and to our attitudes and I think a lot of this is going to come down to sort of the education, and I'm sure we're going to go into that sort of a bit further.
We will. Amen to that. And another thinker in a very different way is the brilliant Leanne Elliott-Young, who I met the other day, who I just fell in love with immediately when she was on a panel I was at. And Leanne is the CEO and founder of the Digital Fashion Institute, correct? And I mean, to put it bluntly, anything in future that involves AI or VR will be something that she's probably touched or created, most likely. I mean, you may or may not know about Balenciaga partnering with Fortnite, that big gaming thing, and doing these skins and everything. But anyway, Leanne can tell us lots more about that. But in brief, Leanne, what have I missed in your short biog, and what are you excited about the sustainability in fashion?
Well, so we founded our company at the beginning, the Institute of Digital Fashion, just at the beginning of COVID. And it was born from the frustrations. I think we're all aligned with that in the fashion industry. So predominantly it's digital fashion, but also digital avatars, so digital humans and environments. But the one thing that we do is we're not negating the physical world. We're actually talking about the IRL and URL, so physical and digital working together in unison. So after just a year and a half, we have 4 world firsts under our belt, and we really are looking to impact change. And working from, as you were saying, Nicholas, from the roots up, we have an IRL, URL Learning Academy. We've partnered with 2 of the big software companies as a view to how we can collectively activate change. So yeah, it's a bit about
Thank you very much, Leanne. And last but absolutely no means least is the hero of all heroes, is Francois Souchet, who knows more than I think almost anyone on this earth about fashion and sustainability. He worked his way through Accenture, then was the lead on making fashion circular at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I'm sure a lot of you here will know that Ellen MacArthur, as well as being a great woman of the waves, has also created a huge amount of awareness around the future of the world really needing to be based around the circular economy. So that's where Francois steps in, and he is now global head of sustainability at my favourite PR company, who's one of the founders is sitting right there in front of us, Julian, the nicest and one of the best PR companies in the world, but the nicest too. And Francois is the head of global sustainability there. So Francois, I hope I've got everything there. What could you give us a couple of sentences about where you think the hope is, as well as the problems?
Yeah, I think it's that's a very good point, right? Like where the hope is. I think one of the few things that in my short time in this industry I've seen is like first how much the conversation has moved from when I started talking about it to now, and just remembering initial conversations with brands in 2017, where we were talking about investing in new business models way beyond what they were doing, thinking about resale, rental, and being faced with a big no, that's niche, we don't care. And now actually seeing some of the largest brands that we know really openly talking about it. So just that. And the second side is all the technical innovation that's happening in the background that actually provides really valuable solutions to what's happening. And I think the third aspect is definitely what you're doing, which is kind of moving the conversation beyond just how do we circulate products more effectively, but how can we create opportunities beyond where products are.
That brings what we were just talking a minute ago. That's one of our, I suppose, like, what's your elevator pitch? And it's like, how do we sell creativity and not more clothes?
Right.
And that's like a key thing that we talk about. So,
Great. Love that. Well, brilliant. And so since the theme of tonight is sex and sustainability, just so we don't get too bored and we don't get too scientific, I thought I might just start by giving you all, I don't know if does anyone here in the audience know any facts or statistics or horror things, myths around sustainability and fashion? Anyone interested or know anything? And one of them should do. She's looking at me because she worked for me. I'm not going to embarrass her though. Okay, I'm going to start with a few things that, for those of you in the room who do buy clothes, which I'm sure most of you do because you don't look that dishevelled. So, I mean, you've probably all seen the wildfires and floods we had this year. California, Australia, Greece and Germany. Fashion is one of the most resource-intensive industries on this planet when it comes to consumer goods, okay? The UN has said that by 2050 we would need not one but 3 actual Earths, physical Earths, to sustain our current lifestyles. And fashion is responsible for about 10% of the carbon emissions that cause the fact that we might need these 3 Earths. It's using up more emissions than global shipping and flights combined. And if nothing changes by 2050, the fashion industry will be using up 1/4 of the world's carbon budget. Okay? That's pretty shocking. And another few things, just to get everyone really bored and send you to sleep. Fashion produces about 150 billion items of clothing or accessories every year. And the production is expected to increase by 81% by 2030, which means that the emissions will surge by 50%. So I don't know if you guys will be reading COP26 is on us. 2030, we've got to try and keep the thing down to 1.5 degrees, but I mean, fashion's literally going right against that. And a lot of the products in fashion that are the most dangerous are made from synthetics, which are oil. So if you guys have any of you things in your wardrobe that have got polyester, acrylic, nylon, all of these come from oil, they're plastics, okay? And a lot of things now are saying, oh, but this is recycled polyester. Don't be fooled, okay? Don't be fooled. Would you guys agree on that? Francois, what would you say about, I know Nick feels strongly about the recycling argument. I feel very strongly that just because something says recycled doesn't mean it's better. So, Francois, okay, Nick, you go first.
Well, I mean, recycling is part of the solution. It isn't the solution, but my problem with it is recycle something that then can be recycled again. Don't recycle something that can then not be recycled again, and its only chance is to go into landfill afterwards. A perfect example of this is is, I've sort of seen certain brands where they're like, oh, we're gonna use plastic from the sea, and we're gonna make our garments out of plastic from the sea, and then that garment is blended with something else that then also can't be recycled. So essentially, you're telling me you're going to take it out of the sea, you're going to put it on someone for 2 years, and then put it into landfill, which, on the grand scale of things, is basically the same as taking it out of the sea and putting it into
As
landfill.
oil, yeah. A lot of you might see now when you start shopping is, oh, dead stock fabrics. This brand is using dead stock fabrics. It's using waste fabrics. Great. Now, I was talking to Lindsay tonight, and she reminded me. Now, do you want to tell us about the thing in China you told me that was so interesting?
Yeah, so I think ideally it was a good idea, and I think it worked for a bit until places like manufacturing places like the ones in China caught on that they were selling a lot of dead stock fabric. So then they should probably make more dead stock fabric to keep up with consumer demands. Yeah. So now it's
overproduce.
Now it's become a myth. I think it did work for a point until it was caught on that they were making a lot of money and they could make more money because I think it's kind of a cop-out way to say if you're a sustainable brand that you are sustainable because you're just buying dead stock fabric.
Yeah. Which leads me on to actually what does sustainable even mean? I mean, okay, one definition that I did a program at Cambridge University in the Sustainable Leadership Institute, and one thing they taught us was sustainable means if a process or product is sustainable, in inverted commas, it either put back the same or more into the earth than it took out in the process of being made, right? Like that's one way of looking at it. Francois, what would you say about that? Because you guys need to know all this, because if you see brands marketing themselves as sustainable, it actually kind of means nothing until you know what that breaks down into. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like, we had this conversation just before about the fundamental need to look at it as a whole system, right? So like what makes something sustainable is exactly what you say, is like looking at all the different ways in which it impacted ecosystem, like whether it's like withdrawing water, taking space on land, creating emissions, creating waste, and then making sure that either this is eliminated or that it's compensated in a meaningful way, and like similar to like all the offsets, but we can go into that. But I think like the dead stock conversation is really funny, right? Because fundamentally why we have dead stock is because we overproduce. Yeah. And so marking dead stock as sustainable just in itself is slightly ironic. Yeah. But then saying that because we managed to do that, we create even more dead stock simply to sustain the need we have to pretend we're sustainable. I mean, it's like the snake eating its own tail. Yeah. It's
crazy.
Very, very ironic.
And it all comes down to consumption, doesn't it? Because this is where our conversation was going earlier. That you were asking about myths, Mary, myths in the fashion industry.
I've asked everyone here to come with a myth.
Yeah,
I'm going to quiz them all in a minute anyway.
Well, and I was saying to you, I think a big myth in the fashion industry is that if you're consuming sustainable products, then that is sustainable. And I think that what we all realise is that actually the single biggest thing you can do is buy less. Yeah. Keep anything you have for a really long time and keep using it. That's the single biggest thing you can do. But meanwhile, with your dead stock example and what we were talking about earlier, you're like, oh great, it's dead stock. Let me buy 100 of them. Fantastic. I'm doing my bit for sustainability. Meanwhile, the big brands are going, we're really sustainable. They're throwing their marketing budget at it, and it's very frustrating because you're like, well, as long as you're marketing the crap out of this and making us buy more of it, actually that is inherently unsustainable. So there's a real dichotomy there, which is really tricky. And we have to wear clothes. We're all here because we love fashion, right? Yes. I haven't fallen out of love with fashion. I mean, our relationship is going through a bad patch because it's killing the planet. But there's got to be a balance that we find, right, between loving fashion, using it as our expression, and dressing ourselves. It would be a different scenario if we were all here without clothes this evening. But also being able to understand that the way that we're consuming right now is just impossible to continue with on a finite planet. That's the reality.
As with that statistic, we would need 3 Earths. I mean,
seeing as Mary said that I'm telling like it is, I feel like that means I can be very honest and speak freely. So blame her. I would say this, when you talk, first of all, she knows how I feel about what we call in our office the S word, sustainable. Because the hard-boiled egg fact of it all is there is no way for fashion as it is right now to be 100% sustainable. If anything probably ticks me off about that is when companies come and say, we're the first sustainable, we're 100% sustainable.
Yeah, no nonsense.
How?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
But they can never tell you how.
Yeah.
And as I want to speak to all of you in this room right now, as a consumer, when you buy something, I want you to think about it. Next time you buy a shirt, pair of socks, pair of shoes, a hair accessory, I don't care what it is. Think about this. How ethical and how responsible it is. Not so much how sustainable it is, because there's nothing can be 100% sustainable, but how ethical, how responsible are you being in your thought process to buy this item? How ethical and how responsible is the manufacturer being in order not only to produce it, but get it to you? And you know what? A lot of things that a lot of consumers overlook is the fact that you hold the power.
But how can consumers know that?
Google. Sometimes it's just a little Google search.
A little
Or,
Google
you know,
search.
It's
Okay.
a tricky one, though. 'Cause
It's a tricky one.
I feel for
Also,
consumers when we give them this responsibility.
Absolutely. Because what's now being thrown at the consumer, and I actually I basically gave a whole Instagram TED talk over the weekend on this, is you have so many brands right now that are throwing that they're B Corp certified or HIG index compliant, or they follow this type of governance, or speaking to, again, recycled materials. I ain't gonna name no names because, I don't know what bridge I may have to cross again. But I will say this, a lot of companies that are throwing things at the consumer and saying, we're doing great, we're B Corp certified. Well, how are you B Corp certified, and what does that mean to you as a consumer? So when you get these newsletters and these emails, I got one last week, again, not naming no names, I'm not one to gossip, but you have to look at what are they saying, why are you B Corp certified? And why did you have to be B Corp certified in order to just be transparent to me as the consumer? If you were just wanted to be a responsible brand, all you had to do is show me how y'all made the garment. How many people made it? How did it get to me? How can I extend the life of the garment? What can I do to recycle the garment, upcycle the garment? What's the value of the garment to me after I've worn it for 5 years? You didn't have to go out there and become XYZ certified if you were just honest. So next time you buy something, just ask, how transparent, how honest are they? Or are they going to sell you, I'm from America, so if I say some colloquialisms or sayings that goes over your head, please raise your hand so I'll explain them. Don't sell people wolf tickets. And basically a wolf ticket.
What's a wolf ticket?
And my family come from America.
Well, you know how the wolf was nice to the 3 little pigs, and then he came huffed and puffed and blew their houses down.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you don't want to buy no ticket to that. You don't want nobody to come say you something slick, then they come back, they huff, puff, blow your house down. And you don't want to be the person left in the straw house now. Your house get blown down, then what you gonna do? So, as a consumer, you just have to think logically and ask the question. It's okay. I mean, I'm one of those people, I'm the consumer that'll go on a brand's Instagram and be like, y'all told me that this was going to do this, and it's got a hole in it. Y'all did not tell me where I could take it to go get it, this, and this. And I know these people be like, just don't buy nothing else, please, lady. Don't buy nothing. Like, we are so sick and tired of you.
Well said.
So you just have to be that person. And it's okay, because if you don't educate, I would say this, my biggest frustration, and I'm pretty sure everybody on here can say, the biggest frustration is so much responsibility falls into the consumer's hands.
Too much. Yeah. Too much.
You agree, right?
Yeah. I mean, to the point where, like, in the US now, this isn't a fashion example, but what I think is amazing is the states of Maine and Oregon, I think there might be one more recently, just turned around and said, you know what, enough. We are not going to be responsible for recycling all these endless cardboard boxes that are mainly from Amazon. If you're a producer and you send stuff to the consumer in a cardboard box, you've got to take care of it. We're done. And it's like, that's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I mean, and that's just one example, but yes, I agree. I think that consumers shouldn't be expected to know. I think a lot of consumers, I don't know about you guys in here, but to look at the label of a clothing, if you might know, you'll know what cotton is and linen is, but like there's not enough information on the labels inside the clothing, and consumers get really, really confused, understandably, right? But I wanted to go on to thinking about, Sarah mentioned something about the fact that we love fashion, and I agree. I think we're all here because we love it. Otherwise, we will be working in NGOs and being really worthy somewhere. But I was thinking when Sarah's talking about us loving fashion, about the future of it and what turns us on about fashion and what's going to be sexy about fashion in the years to come. And Leanne, I was thinking about the kids, because if you look at Greta being on the cover of Vogue and the fact that, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but that Gen Y and Gen Z are kind of conflicted because on the one hand, they all follow Greta, they're all out there marching and protesting. On the other hand, a lot of them are buying Shein and Boohoo and Pretty Little Thing. And therein lies the conflict. But they're also the kids who are into digital. So do you think, Leanne, that the future of fashion can be saved partially by the kind of thing that the work you're doing and the kids that have that you are your audience?
Yeah, I mean, we made for London Fashion Week, we made a digital try-on, and that got 2.5 million wears. So that was broadcast not just in the UK, that amplified all the way. There was Shanghai, Russia, like the drive for it and the desire for it is hard. And we were talking earlier about like what does it mean, like digital fashion? Are we all going to be naked? No, we're not all going to be naked.
So.
Are we
going to be fun?
We're all going to be naked.
World.
Yeah, all naked with digital avatars of ourselves, our digital clothes. I don't think it's going to be that, but we have seen, the AR industry is a £10 billion industry.
Right.
The gaming industry is double that. We've seen a seismic shift in now where digital was something that was just a little cherry on the cake, for a fashion experience or just in the whole like creative landscapes. Now it's the way that we wear and consume, and we're a part of even the conversations with one another. We're all on Zoom together, so we're all part of this URL reality. It's not that awkward now. It's to get someone on Zoom or be immersed in that digital world. And we've seen through COVID a 76% of people gaming.
Right.
And that means that in the near future, those individuals who are, I'm talking about the youth, who are
the youth
who are sat gaming are the future CEOs, are the future consumers, are the future of our space. And I feel like they think differently and they work differently. And so digital fashion and just being in a digital universe isn't that as abstract as it feels to us.
Okay, but do you think, so to that end, like, if the kids now, obviously, they're constantly updating their Instagram stories, their Snapchat, their TikTok, they need new outfits, they need new looks, they've got audiences, they behave like celebrities, and I know that I've dressed these celebrities, they need new outfits all the time because their images out there. So if these kids are behaving like that, is there a world in which, like,
nothing needs to be made.
Or do like where fashion might become like an item of fashion might be like a green screen where like you could just project onto your avatar that's on the screen that's doing a Zoom call, that's doing its gaming or whatever. Like, okay, I feel like wearing a pink ruffle neck shot. Okay, click, and then it'll literally look like you're wearing it. Is that it? So that you can avoid having to buy Shane, basically.
Absolutely, which is a digital trial which exists in effectively AR, augmented reality.
Yeah.
So for Fashion Week, we also created for Richard Quinn a digital show. And that show, it wasn't in our digital reality. There's not as many limitations. There's no gravity, So when you ask Richard to create a digital show, the mad genius could just go wild. There's a pink river and a whole expansive world. So it means that the creativity is put on steroids effectively. You can do more, you can build your creative universe. So for a lot of people think that digital is, in a way, there's less creativity and there's like a quick magic push button, it all happens. Actually, there's a lot of skill, craft and artisan, but it also allows the creatives to explore further and deeper.
Got it. Interesting. Did everyone get that? I think I get it. I mean, to me, it sounds. Did anyone else feel like? To me, it sounds like the idea that fashion plays a role in our lives of fantasy, right? I don't need to be wearing pink sequins tonight. None of us need to actually be wearing what we're wearing, but we do it because it expresses who we are and says about who we want to be and many other things. But it seems like the fantasy side of fashion, that the side that we get off on, that's sexy to us, which is like where you become someone and you get to wear it's a version of a costume. Is that something that your technology or the kind of technology you're talking about would enable people to play with? So that side of creativity and fantasy that gives us that hit is like a sugar rush in fashion, right? Is that something we could get through digital? Then we only need to have a wardrobe of basics, maybe, and a few special bits. But
the other thing is digital layering. So with you can use a logo, so a logo can be tracked, and when you hold your phone up to that, you could effectively be wearing a t-shirt. You hold your phone up, and an augmented couture gown you're wearing. So it means that seasonally can be updated.
What about data mining? Because I don't know if anyone else here has read, and that crypto obviously is incredibly resource intensive. And is the work that you do, is that resource intensive in terms of the data mining, or is it?
We've got a render farm, which is a stack of 27 computers.
Okay.
They render, but those computers run overnight. It's exactly the same as if there's an office full of 27 computers. All they do is create effectively a frame of of the movie, I'm trying to use
Okay.
layman terms, the frame
Yeah.
of the movie you're trying to create all at the same time, so it makes it quicker.
Okay.
So it's not like mining
Okay.
for Bitcoin
Okay.
at all, or
Good.
cryptocurrencies, which
Okay.
do take a hell of a lot of energy.
Yeah, they're terrifying.
But there is sustainable solutions in that space. Like there's
You're
like,
on it. Are you on it?
But as far as as far as mining,
No pressure.
yeah, just because you can use obviously hydropower. So there's now like miners sat
Okay.
at the base of waterfalls
Okay.
using the hydropower.
I quite want their job, actually.
So not
Sounds
actually
quite
that,
nice.
but that's quite a fun.
Are they rowing?
Yeah, just like
With a
the
waterproof
power for the
computer.
water. Yeah, if you go to Falls to Iguazu now, there's now just like loads
I
of tech
love it.
geeks.
Oh, no hoodies under the waterfall. I love
Yeah,
it.
no.
And speaking of currency and crypto, I wanted to put a question to Sarah. I'm sure lots of people, if you're all members at the NED, I'm sure you're maybe loosely involved in entrepreneurialism or finance, because we're in the heart of the city. And Sarah, of course, is pioneering this female-focused and climate change-oriented fund. So, Sarah, can you tell us what you find sexy in terms as an investor in fashion? Like, what would you invest in? If you suddenly won £1 billion in the lottery tomorrow and you could spend it on 3 things to enhance the future of fashion and make it sustainable and make it last forever, what would you spend it on?
That's a great question. Where would I start? Well,
No pressure.
so the answer to that might be slightly different to where I'm investing in from my fund. So the answer to that big question, where would I be spending that money? If I had a huge windfall, I would definitely be investing it in some of the things that my fund is driving, which I'll mention in a second. But actually, with that huge amount of money, I would be investing a lot of it in comms. For me, a really big challenge is that the way that we consume media at the moment is basically funded by big brands. And big brands aren't incentivized in the system we have, the capitalist system we have, to make less. They're incentivized to make more,
Correct.
produce more, sell more. And so it's in the interest of these big brands who have the big marketing budgets to persuade us all to do that. And so the narrative that we see everywhere, and I think that the consumer can't escape this, and it's in our relationship with fashion that we've had for decades. It's deep within us all. This idea of newness, of the dopamine we get around buying something. And that can't just disappear. We can't just pretend that doesn't exist. And I think that the only way to change this is to change the narrative. And in order to change that narrative, basically you need someone with a huge amount of money to put narrative out into the world that isn't driven by someone who actually wants to sell stuff.
Okay.
So I would throw some money at that narrative.
Okay.
I would change the narrative so that I'm not begging people not to buy things. I'm not telling them that they should feel guilty about it. I'm actually changing the way that they think about things. And the media has the power to do that. So that's where I throw a load of money.
Okay. Okay.
Where I would also throw a load of money, which is where I'm already going to be throwing a load of money. So I'm currently raising an investment fund, which is going to be funding female founders who drive change towards climate solutions. To give you an idea, men have lots of great ideas too. Keen to back amazing guys as well. But at the moment, 2% of venture capital funding goes to women. 2%. Like you might imagine it's a bit lower because of the usual gaps between men and women. But guys, 2%. Come on. And at the same time, for every euro sort of dollar invested in female founders, they make 96% more money than male founders do.
Wait, explain that again.
Well, so if you hate to pick on you, Nick, but you're closer to me. If you give me a quid and we give you a quid, percentage-wise, I'm likely to basically make double what you make. Not in the reality of our lives here, but statistically.
Okay.
So the point I'm making is that we should be funding women as much as we're funding men. That's all.
Right.
And so in order to drive that change, what I think we need is not mandates saying, oh, we need to fund more women. What I think we need is women funding women. So I've come from an unusual background to be in venture capital, come from design and innovation. But I've started a fund which is going to be investing in female founders and driving solutions to climate crisis, because having worked with so many startups and having seen the system as well by working with, you know, everything from NGO to United Nations to startups, you know, I'm sort of playing in a field somewhere between technology and economics and sustainability and design. And when you understand how those systems works, and particularly in relationship to our financial systems, what you realise is that nothing can change and nothing can happen until our financial systems change. Yeah. And so for me, at the root of every conversation I have,
it's literally like turning the power on or off, right?
With every startup I have, I see great ideas, great innovation not being funded. And we were talking earlier and saying often what we're seeing at the moment in the startup landscape with the, you know, sort of the innovation we desperately need in materials, for example, because you know, we've been investing in plastics and innovation in those materials for decades. And frankly, there's super materials.
And on the subject of people, I wanted to ask Jay, because one thing we haven't touched on is where the other big topic that a lot of companies are embracing, of course, and have been in recent years, is diversity and inclusion, or D&I. And there is a sort of Venn diagram where D&I crosses into sustainability. And a lot of people think, well, sustainability is about climate and environment, and diversity and inclusion is diversity. But there is a big crossover, and I think there's a lot of misnomers around that. So, Jay, I wanted to get you to talk about, you know, if anyone is interested in all three subjects, or think they don't need to know about one or the other, there is a big crossover. Do you want to tell us?
Sorry, I'm just pulling up my notes because I like to be as accurate as possible. When it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can't have sustainability without recognizing it.
Why is that?
And the reason being is because all the wonderful garments that we obsess about and we talk about how to make more ethically and responsibly, guess who makes them? People who are living in marginalized communities. People who are literally earning $3 to $4 US equivalent every day. And that's not just in far-off countries that you've never ever heard of. That's right in the good old USA, the good old UK.
Yeah, Leicester.
There's Leicester with Boohoo. Sorry, I had to name a name. I try not to do that.
No, but it's in the press. It's out there in the public
exception.
domain. I mean,
you know, but it is what it is. And I think what happens is they get overlooked. And for me, it's a very sensitive topic for me, because, I mean, obviously I am who I am. I'm an African-American woman who comes from a marginalized background, and everything good and bad that affects fashion affects my life in one way or the other. Whether it is, you know, I'm from the great state of Louisiana, and whether it's petrochemicals that are still seeping into the waters that affect people who not only just look like me, but people who come where I come from. You know, I just really, you know, everybody wants to talk about the innovations in plastics, but nobody understands that plastic is literally the new coal. Over 65% of coal mines throughout the U.S. by last year, 2020, had closed down. But what that meant was that coal companies and a lot of the oil companies shifted to making more plastics. So in places like the Houston Baytown area, well, where my mother now lives, in their water systems, there's actually plastics. So now my mother, who is 54 years old, who never had an allergy in her life, now just found out she's developed lupus, an autoimmune deficiency syndrome, which they can link to the fact that there is some traces of biochemicals within the water. There's no amount of water. It's no amount of water within that particular thing. But guess what? We have clothes that are made every day.
Out of plastic.
Out of plastic.
Yeah.
Right.
And now hasn't, I'm sure you guys have read that, and Francois, you'll probably correct me here, but I read somewhere the other day that microplastics, which come from all our synthetic clothes, polyesters, acrylics, knives, etc., when they get washed, they release these tiny, tiny particles of plastic. They're now plastics, these microplastics have gone through the blood-brain barrier, is that right? So they're now finding these microplastics in our organs, aren't they?
Yeah, you can find them everywhere, like in beer, in water, in the body. And the problem is, like, the problem with bioaccumulation is exactly what you were saying, is that it takes years to understand what bioaccumulation does to your body, simply because just having like a little bit of plastic won't do anything. But over time, the impact and it would depend on each individual, right? Because your body will react in different ways. And so what the industry is relying on is full studies, because it's nearly impossible to prove a causal relationship between presence of microplastics and like modified behavioral and health aspects simply because it will depend on people, and you can always claim that statistically the group was not right, that like the test group was not right, and that
and it's so convoluted, isn't it? Like, okay, we made these polyester leggings, and somebody down there has got a problem with her immune system. So what, like, how, like, you know?
And it's really evidenced as well in the fact
Yeah.
that, Textiles 2030, which is an initiative, a voluntary initiative that's being launched in the fashion industry in the UK, it's about companies coming together in order to make agreements about targets that they want to meet in terms of sustainability. It's really telling that one of the things that they intentionally have not made any regulation around is microfiber pollution, the fibers that come from fashion. And their reasoning for that, wrapped the charity behind this, their reasoning for that was there just really isn't enough evidence around exactly what the problem is, exactly how we deal with it, exactly how we prevent it, exactly the damage we're doing. And the timeline to finding that out is really long. But at the same time, we haven't got time for this to go wrong, have we?
Right. So when I hear things like that, I immediately get frustrated. So because it's not so much, and the crazy part is my mother's a pharmacologist. So my mother is a member of the medical community and spends way too much time on medical studies for somebody who has a life. But it's not so much as they don't have the time, it's about making the time. And unfortunately for fashion, it's an industry that kind of gets overlooked in a sense, and they kind of gloss over it because it makes money. A lot of things that come down to change is money. Same way that, she was able to get this mega windfall for her fund, it's money. That's kind of what it boils down to. And they would make the time if there was money in making the time. There is no money in making the time, so there is no money in going to look at these studies. Now, it was just actually revealed, I believe, last week, especially as leading up to COP26, where they've been found that big oil has been going to scientists, asking them to delete valuable information from reports stating about the damages and effect of climate change based upon oil. You want to know why? Because nobody wants to pay $3.49 in America for gasoline, and nobody wants to pay, again, I'm probably messing this up because every time I see the fuel prices in the UK, it totally blows my mind because I don't understand what I'm reading. But it just looks high, it looks expensive, that's all I know, because I don't really get it, but I'm learning. Work with me. But the thing is, nobody wants to pay the higher price. So everyone, there's this big pass the buck along. And unfortunately, being more aware and more conscious and putting the time and the money into these studies that she just realized, there's no money in it. Nobody wants to do it.
And they're voluntary.
And they're voluntary. They're not mandated. Nobody is going to these companies saying that you have to care. If you want to make more money, then you have to care. Nobody thinks like that because, to be honest, you would think that's a logical thing to do. But it ain't the fun thing to do.
And because they're voluntary, no one holds anyone to account. So actually the way these systems work is that the brands go in, they make rules between themselves that they can probably achieve, targets they can probably achieve, and then actually if they don't achieve them, no one reports on it because they're the ones reporting. So actually some of these voluntary systems, don't get me wrong, I think it's great because I think it brings the narrative around the importance of this, but I think that the government really needs to actually regulate and legislate in a mandatory way to be able to make sure that everyone's held to account here. Otherwise, actually, what you've got is a really unbalanced playing field for sustainable brands versus non-sustainable ones, because there's no incentive to be sustainable.
Absolutely, and that kind of brings back to where Mary kind of introed into this in regards to the DEI part. Now, even speaking to more or less your portion, 2% of funding goes to women, right? We're 2%.
Yeah, do you want to know what that is for?
1.2.
Oh, no, less than.
It averages about 1.2. 1.2, about 1.2 or less.
Or should we just carry on speaking?
Come on,
No,
share
it's
the
okay.
secret. Spill the beans.
On the high end, about 1.2% of funding goes to Black BIPOC founders. And basically what that means, especially when you talk about that, is one of the most influential cultures around us, which is very much minority cultures, which influences a lot of where fashion is going, receives less than 1.2% of funding.
Across Europe, it's less than 0.5%.
And that's just across Europe.
That's bananas.
In America, 1.2 is really high. 1.2%.
That's ridiculous.
That's not even a drop in a bucket. And I can say this because I've actually went through Series A funding, Series B funding as well. So I know what the VC process is like, and it's tough. But I can also say, I can sit here right now as an African American woman, thank God, and watch out for, it's also Creole International Month for us. Yay. So shout out to all my Creoles. It's really hard to see your influence not be funded. It's really hard to want to know that you can do better and want to do better and not be funded. Also, when you
know it's good.
When you know it's good.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
When you know you're doing it right,
Yeah.
you know it's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And also back to the point as far as diversity and inclusion, and Mary and I have both talked about this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with SB 62, which actually just made in California, which just passed here recently.
the garment workers.
So for garment workers in California especially, because everyone thinks that sweatshops only exist in these places that you don't see, places you'll never go. But they're right here, again, like I was saying, they're right here in the places that you're very familiar with. So part of what was going on in California, especially in those sweatshops that they had, and I'm going to call them what they were sweatshops. These people, men and women, most of them, African American or of African descent, as well as Hispanic workers, were paid by the piece. The equivalent of what they were being paid by the piece should have been about $10.50 per hour, roughly. And that's because in America, minimum wage is about $7.25, which is a hot mess, seeing as that's been the minimum wage since like 1970 something, and then it got raised about 20 years ago, but that doesn't help with inflation. So these women should have been making about $23,000 a year, but they were making less than $199 per month.
That's 90% less than they
So
should be
how
earning.
exactly? So tell me, how does that make sense? Doesn't really. When you start thinking 109, so you pay $400 for a sweater, they got paid by the piece to make it and made about $199 per month. And think about how many pieces they had to make $199 per month.
It's like that whole thing of like, does anyone remember the £1 bikini, the gold bikini that Primark had? I mean, it made the news. It's like, if you think, okay, like for anyone who's like to really think about fashion, okay, if an item is made, let's take synthetics away from it, but let's take, say, a £1 t-shirt that you can probably get at Primark, right? A piece of cotton has to be grown. It's a plant. It has to be farmed. Farmers have to tend to it. Then they need chemicals. Unfortunately, a lot of them use pesticides. So that takes their farmer's labour and some money to spend on the pesticides and the earth, and he's got to feed his family, so then he grows the cotton. Then the cotton has to be cut and cultivated, harvested, etc. Then it gets transported, and it gets then spun and woven, then dyed in a different place. So all along the place, we've got different journeys it's going on, stopping at different places along the way. Then it's been transported here, there, and everywhere. Then it eventually gets to being dyed, turned into a roll of fabric. So it's already gone through a phenomenal amount of stages. Then it's got to then be cut, stitched, transported, maybe embellished, maybe printed on, transported, sent to manufacturer, then sent to their warehouse. Now, if you imagine all of that, both labour and materials and resources have gone into that item, how is it possible that a t-shirt could be even £5, the same price as a cup of coffee, a big Starbucks or a sandwich? How is that possible when you think about all those processes, right? Like, does that blow anyone else's mind? Like, it's
Every
just that
day.
you know that if something's cheap, then someone somewhere has suffered, and that's going to be the planet and its people. It's just not possible. It's literally impossible, isn't it?
And I think we have to start thinking more or less, again, as Mary said, people, and not just Mary, but thank God, thankfully we're starting to hear more that you can't have sustainability without thinking about the people. It just doesn't make sense.
It's not just the environment.
It's just not about just, and not to speak in I said I wasn't going to talk about school. But one thing that's missing is, especially in fashion school, I think I'm very blessed that I was able to go to business school. So I think of things from a very combination of ways. But one of the things that isn't taught very thoroughly in fashion school is to think of the people that you want to design for, the people that you are addressing, the people that you are making these particular products for. When you go to a PD meeting, nobody talks about the people who are making it. That's just what it is. That doesn't happen in the PD process.
Yeah.
You don't, when you're in school and you're getting ready for, your end of year show, a lot of times I tell you, people may influence the show, but you don't really think about, like, if this was mass produced, how would people be affected? Nobody really talks about what the mass production process really looks like, because mass production really has only been around for about 100 years or less. It didn't really happen until there was like world wars, and there was nobody around to make small batches of clothes. So they were like, we got to mass produce in order to meet the needs of the people, right? So if we haven't even in a span of probably 100 years or less, we've created this crazy problem. That's crazy, right? If you think it was the 1910s and 1920s, and basically and really the biggest I would say the biggest push for mass production was Henry Ford and the Model T. And that came around like 1917, 1918, right? So around that time is when we really started to see that you could put things on this big conveyor belt, make these big machines, and have things going in mass production, and shoot them out and put them on a ship, and da-da-da-da. Nobody thought about, I call it the dismount. Everybody trains to run up to the pommel horse. Nobody thinks about the dismount. And right now, we're somewhere up in the air. And we have to think about how to dismount, right? Mm-hmm. So where's the
Speaking of
landing?
dismounting, actually, I think one thing we haven't touched on, I'm sure everyone in this audience is interested to hear about, is trends. Okay, because that's one of the issues, right? Like, what does everybody here think about trends? Personally, I think they are one of the reasons why we're in so much SHIT with this whole thing, is that like this constant being pushed and pushed, this is on trend, that is obsolete. I mean, there's this expression called planned obsolescence. That's what fashion exists on. Like if you buy stuff, if you guys have all bought stuff on Amazon, it might be a new blender or a new toaster, you're like, my God, it went wrong after 6 months. Well, some things are planned not to last, right? Fashion's planned literally not to last sometimes past 3 months for short seasons, let alone even the 6 months traditional season. So how we get around that? Nick, I mean, you've been making your own product for over 15 years, and like, how do you in future think you could try and, like, or any brand, small or large, expensive or affordable, can rationalize sales and continue to make profit, not necessarily growth, but profit, with not being completely enslaved by the idea of trends?
So I
It's a
think,
tricky one.
it is definitely a tricky one. I think, I think we've sort of seen the importance and the speed of trends really sort of pick up speed, particularly from, I'd say, since the 2008 recession. I think what happened there is department stores, particularly in the US, but then it really affected the rest of the world, essentially started to panic and say, look, we're only going to like buy the things that we know sort of sell, and the things that we know sell are the things that we do merchandising on. And so essentially buyers over that sort of the next sort of 10 years really actually became less about, I know my customer, I know what they'll want, and I've never seen this piece before, but I know that my customer is going to want to buy it, and or the idea that, I like this brand, and this brand's particularly good at this type of thing, so I'm going to buy that brand for this type of kind of product. So, for example, maybe it is, a trend, they see on the runway, like, oh, look, there's cowboy boots everywhere. So they then go to brands and say, look, you need to make the cowboy boot, or we're not going to sort of buy you. So they essentially then end up kind of buying the same type of product off every single sort of brand, and so therefore, each of the brands, and I've witnessed this myself, I feel that over the years, we're sort of being pushed to sort of make product that, maybe is not entirely within your sort of DNA, in order just to not get kind of dropped. And essentially, what that kind of does, it starts to erode the respect for the creative process in the first place. And essentially, I kind of almost sort of find myself, I'm making expensive luxury shoes, but I sometimes kind of feel like I'm making expensive fast fashion. And I design something, the sales also during that time, because of globalization, and you can buy stuff online anywhere in the world. Sales used to be after Christmas. Everybody sort of knew Boxing Day, it was kind of Christmas. Now it's like end of October, November. Yeah. So there's time that I then sort of deliver a product, so it's boots in winter, it goes on sale before it even gets cold. And so it just makes no sense at all. Yeah. So therefore, then, the brands are, it's become, I just think, I don't know. I mean, what is the solution? I think owning, I think having that, having a direct-to-consumer model is something where the brands themselves get to curate what they believe they want to be putting out there.
And what they do well, what they like to make.
Also, how much is actually also kind of produced. Because, so much of this then goes on sale. And then, like we sort of notice on so many examples, sometimes the bad thing, whether it's the recycling or whether it's the whether it's sort of sale, you actually make more money sometimes sort of doing that. So you're almost buying to put things on sale. So it becomes frustrating as a sort of designer. It becomes frustrating also for the customer. The customer now knows that they can actually wait for sale now because you know there's only going to be probably 2 months of full price sale before it actually goes then on sale.
On markdown,
so it's a bit like on markdown. So like then why unless you're actually psycho for having the newest thing right off the runway. You just wait 2 months and it's going to be, it's going to be in the sale. Yeah. It's extremely like frustrating, and I think what are the, how do we sort of solve that? I think is, I think over this over sort of the last year and a half, especially the first half of COVID, it was kind of like amazing. First half of COVID, everybody had such great ideas about how to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And it was a bit like, do you know what? We're going to talk about slow fashion. We're going to talk about the importance of making
buy less
better, and buy it
yeah.
better. And even big brands were talking about this. And the reality is that actually kind of, if that was the reality, that would be a great solution, because no one is chucking out their Hermes Birkin bag. That is getting passed down generations, and but the reality is, who's going to be the first one to jump? It's not like one brand it can't, they'd all have to almost get everybody in a room and agree to do it at the same time, because otherwise your competitor is going to have the one up on you. If you decide to sort of slow down and do the right thing, they're going to overtake you. So it's a real quagmire, and I think it's something. I don't know if it's an easy solution.
I was going to say, if you said to, if you look at it and compare it to the art market, when you buy a piece of art, it then becomes archival and the worth goes up. When you buy a piece of fashion, it then goes onto the sale. It becomes irrelevant after a season. And it's so bizarre when you think of the direct parallels between the creative spheres, the art market, and the fashion sphere. That makes that kind of
Nicholas really just spoke to probably like 5 years of my work world. I was like, yes, I understand. I'm probably a buyer's worst nightmare, because I hate creating collections via piecemeal, because not only do you dilute what the artistry and the creativity of the designer who's presenting a collection that they're proud of and that they've put in months and times of work, going from concept to development to the fit stage to the salesman sample stage, and they're presented to their buyers, and then you come, the buyer said, no, can we make the strap like this? We don't think this, and you're like, excuse me, I've done the research, I kind of know what this is, I've seen what's come down the runways, I have thought about where your customer is, and I'm presenting to you this, and they come back and say, can you make it like this, like this, like this? And there's many a times that I'm just sitting there tearing up the line sheet and just going crazy and just throwing it in there and I just can't do this, because again, I hate talking about like the boring part. I have had a very extensive background in licensing, so I always tell people 90% of the denim that you probably have worn, I probably had to make sure that it was up to standard and that it was perfect in order for even to go into a Nordstrom or a Macy's or a Lord & Taylor, and I did way too much work in that area, and I understand the frustration that designers have, and I understand the frustration that the consumers have, because you get feedback from the consumers, because you go and you read the reviews and they say, but you guys made it like this 2 seasons ago, why is it not like this? And it's because the buyer decided that it wasn't, they thought, from what they heard, and not based upon what the consumer feedback was. So a lot of our trends is very frustrating sometimes, and I feel really concerned and incensed for the consumer and for the customer, is because a lot of times the buyers don't listen.
To wrap this by saying, if all of you brilliant people on the panel here could say one thing to consumers out there to help them in their journey to be cleaner and greener shoppers, and then say one thing to the fashion industry, unfiltered, uncensored, imagine it's after 10 vodka shots, what would you like to say? Sarah, why don't we start with you? What would be the 2 things you say to consumers and the industry?
I wish you'd prepped me for this question before. I mean, goodness me. What I would, you know what? I'm not going to say something to industry. I'm going to say something to government.
Oh, even better. Okay,
Yeah.
Go on. Go on.
So I think that government is dragging its heels. I think that government needs to step up It needs to make mandatory legislation that brings everyone together around these important issues. I think it needs to act like this is an emergency. When you see the emergency response to COVID, you understand what's possible in terms of funding and in terms of making laws and legislation. And we are not seeing this as an emergency, and government needs to see it as an emergency.
And such as like the Consumer Marketing Authority, like Green Claims Code that came out recently, there are no sanctions. There's no obvious sanctions. Am I right?
Actually, there are going to be fines.
There will be, but I mean, like,
but so
not enough.
Let's say TBC on the way that is all going to play out. So we could be hopeful that
Which, by the way, is the new thing is about not green. So if you look on, if you're interested, the Green Claims Code and the Consumer Marketing Authority legislation is about not allowing brands to greenwash, which is a big deal.
So basically, you have to verify any claims you make. So you can't you can't just go ahead and say, oh, this is sustainable. You have to verify it with various certifications, etc. So for me, it's about government stepping up. And I think to the consumer, I guess I'm going to say, don't be too hard on yourself. I think we've sat up here and talked a lot about all the problems, all the challenges, all the things that you must avoid and that are terrible, and all the ways we're screwing everything up. And I don't think it's the consumer's fault. And I think that all too often we're ready, in newspapers and magazines to tell consumers, these are all the ways that you can do better. And you've actually got brands telling you that too. We're going to help you, consumers. We're going to help you to do better. I don't think it's about industry helping you to do better. I think it's about industry fucking doing better. And I will say that after my 10 shots. So
well
I think
said.
Consumers, I think that industry should be enabling you. I don't think that the responsibility should be on you.
It shouldn't be the other way around.
And I think industry, government should be enabling you.
Yes.
So there you go. I've laid into everyone.
It's
Good
great.
night.
It's great. Okay. No, brilliant. Amen. And well said. Jay.
Well, she handled the F word for me already, so there's that. Thank you so much, my dear.
You're so welcome.
I love it. I would say to the consumer, you have more power and you have more access to information at any given time in the history of the world as you do right now. So I encourage you to continue to educate yourself and empower yourself and question brands. I don't care if it's leaf lettuce and they tell you that they came from an organic farm. You ask them, where is the farm? Can I see the farm?
And how do they do this? I mean, do you suggest DMing and tweeting them? And I mean,
whatever
I DM
it is,
quite often.
email, I don't care.
Okay.
Like I am that, so I watch a lot of crazy old TV, like Dynasty is my life. I really think that in my heart, I'm Crystal Carrington. So with that, even if you have to go back and do it old school and write a letter of complaint and say, I don't believe you, you need to prove this, say it. Do it. Guess what? That letter, that DM, that tweet, that email, that whatever is going to end up in someone's lap at some point. And you want to know what? Brands are scared. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They are scared. They're scared of your power. So anytime that you think that you don't have the power, that your tweet, your DM, your whatever doesn't mean anything, trust me, they have way more interns than they know what to do with that are looking at those things and saying, eek, if this gets out, what do we do? Trust me, they
Great.
do.
And then what
so
would you say to
utilize
the
your
industry?
power.
Yeah.
To the industry, catch up. I created a series about a year ago through the Project Management Institute of New York City chapter, which I'm a member of. And I put on a series, which is still ongoing. We have our next meeting, I think, in about 2 months. That basically was me telling them why everything in fashion touches every other industry. And if you don't get up to speed, and if you don't understand how fashion touches your life, I don't care if you think you're a fashionista or you dress like a bum, it touches your life. So you better figure out a way to save it. Because everything that you do moving forward touches life. Mm-hmm. Fashion touches life. Fashion moves life. So with that being said, to the industry, innovate now. Life is already 20 steps ahead of you, and fashion is about 45 steps behind. So to the industry, catch up, because you're already behind.
Well said. Well said. And Lindsay?
For the consumer, I would say try to find the holes or poke holes into any brand that has that slaps on the label of being sustainable.
And ask them how they are. Ask them how to justify that.
Yeah, I think the really honest ones, because now the term is really diluted, and I really hate using it. I just kind of roll my eyes now when I see it on any brand.
Yeah.
But
And that's a takeaway in
Especially
itself.
big brands.
There is a takeaway
Yeah.
in itself.
Big, fast brands.
it's really a misfortune because some brands really are trying to become more sustainable and are actually taking really great strides. But it's just about poking holes. And usually you can find them when you read the bio, if there is even a bio or a story about what they're
See,
doing.
I do that quite often. I mean, the other day I had a blazing DM row with Zalando, okay, because I was so cross about what I saw on their website. I mean, like, it went back and forth like a massive ping pong match. But they kept on trying to send me back and back to their website. So please refer back to our sustainability section on our website. Yeah, I've referred back to that, which is why I'm now bringing you another question. And they'd be like, please refer back. And I was like, okay, so and I know a bit what I'm talking about, but those who don't know what they're talking about, that's one of the problems, right? Like, and you know, they'll try, like, they've flooded me with information about the Higg index, and I was like, I read through it, I was like, whole, wrong, like, But so if I know what I'm talking about, what are people who aren't as passionate as we are, or specialised, should I say, like we are, what do they do about that? That's the tricky thing, right?
Yeah, I think it's just becoming more aware. So when
Yeah.
you're poking holes at anything, you need to look at the material. And even if the material's good, I think if you're not from the have a textile background, the coatings that are put on top of the material, the glue, like nothing is sustainable. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if a brand were to be 100% sustainable, it'd probably be very low impact brand that had very low output, which doesn't really move the needle forward either. So it's not like big brands are bad. It's just trying to find the ones that are a bit more transparent on what they're doing and maybe still admit to, we still use polyester, we still use
But we're aiming not to in the next 3-5
processes.
years or whatever. Like the ones who've got goals, tangible goals, who show that they're trying. I guess that's one to look for.
It's also quite a privileged position to be in, to asking people to do that. I don't know. I think fashion, you know, if you've got enough time to do all those things, you're in quite a privileged position to do that. So it's like, how does an individual that hasn't got the time and is, you know,
point.
and fast fashion has democratized fashion and their freedom of expression for themselves, how do they navigate it?
Yeah, that's true. But I just say it's not that. It doesn't take too long. You're just in Instagram already and like few seconds, right? Hopefully.
I think
Even if it's-
the people that
or
are
just in the
worried
comment
find the
section.
time and do their own research.
Make time. Make
Why it's
time.
not
Yeah.
an issue, I think.
But if you haven't
Make
got time
time.
for the research, still ask the question, because
Yeah.
I still find that sometimes I don't have the research. There are gaps in my knowledge. You know, I don't know the perfect brand to buy from. It's like comparing apples and pears. Someone saves water, the other person uses fewer toxins. So, you know, you're caught in a really impossible situation. But if you ask the question, to your point, if you ask the question, you indicate to these brands that you care and that is going to be part of your buying process. And guess what they care about? Where you're going to spend your money. So even if you have no research, you don't know anything, ask the question, because that's how you can have the power.
And it might come up in a board meeting. They might be like, actually, we had this interesting. You never know, right? It might
It
make
will.
it through.
It will.
Could
Definitely
Or
will,
it could be
because-
cumulative at least, right?
Exactly,
And
because
then
it's
people-
come up on Twitter. I've seen it on Twitter.
exactly.
Ask the question.
Yeah, just bombard. And love, what would you say? Okay, so message to consumers and message to the industry.
Well, I think two major things. I mean, Sarah said it with the legislation, but I mean, a big part is really the education as well.
Okay.
I mean, I was in, and you know, and that comes partly through legislation. You can legislate to educate, and partly that is, you know, with the sort of you know, but that should happen through schools. It should happen on you know, forcing brands like they are now to explain what they mean by their sort of claims. But you know, there's a huge sort of gap in the education part. I mean, I was in LA last year, and I was doing at the beginning of last year, and I was doing a sort of a presentation. This lady kind of came up to me, she was like so happy with her sort of her leather coat, and she said, you know, I've got you know, it's a vegan leather coat. I mean, I feel like I'm doing sort of, essentially kind of saying that she felt that she was kind of doing good for the environment
no,
and
vegan
things like
leather.
that.
Oh,
and I was
no.
like, have you had a look inside
right.
your label? And she said, no. She has a look and it says 100% polyester. And she was actually shocked, like noticeably shocked.
Yeah.
Like the fact that she'd almost, like, either that, you know, she just hadn't kind of put the two and two together.
Yeah.
And I think so that is, you know, that is happening all over the place. So it's so easy to make for a brand to make a claim, and and you know, this happens, I was sort of flicking through, another sort of shopping website, and there was a brand, sort of a well-known brand, and they were sort of using all sorts of explaining each one of their garments as, sustainable in one way or another.
Yeah.
And, I just really wish that sort of brands, when they say like a dress is vegan, essentially they're just like swapping out the word polyester for vegan, and suddenly it falls also then into the sustainable section of the website.
Yeah.
I mean, that is kind of like,
And
it's
it
sort of
sounds
shocking
totally unsustainable.
by itself.
Yeah.
But, so I think, the education has to sort of be there. And I think it's sort of ways to sort of think how we can kind of educate kind of people more. I also just want to sort of say quite a sort of another sort of shocking fact that I actually just worked out myself based off other information that's kind of out there in sort of relation to shoes. So garments and shoes and all accessories, you said, are made up like 25 billion items a year, of which like 150 billion items, of which 25 billion are actually shoes. So if you just work out, Yeah. So, but if you work out that each shoe is about 1 foot in length, and you put a pair together, that's 2 feet, and then sort of times it by 25 billion, and then you get and then you sort of work out how the circumference of the Earth, it essentially wraps around the world every year 344 times. So that is almost 1 lap of the world per day. I mean, that of just shoes. That's just shoes. And so if you just imagine, I mean, how many years and years and years and years and years, and how that is just piling up. Where is all that stuff going?
Leanne, and then finally we'll go to Francois.
I suppose what to say to the consumer and what to say to the industry. I think like what you were saying about on a governmental level, and then it feeds back into like what we can all do. We all have the power to write to our local government, and that means that we can activate change. So that's in your hands that you can do that, because the government is like another brand. And there's enough stakeholders in the brand of the Tory government, which we're part of.
Yeah.
That means that they can, turn the hands to make sure that those decisions that we want to go forward don't go forward. But if we all write to government and petition, it means that these conversations need to happen in Parliament. So I think that's what we should all do.
And how should we write? Should we write to our local MP? Should we write to a particular department, like the DTI? Should we be writing to, say, agriculture and fisheries? Because that's also, like, touches fashion, right? Like,
I mean,
should
that's...
you DM them? Should you tweet them? Like, what's the...
Well, I mean, there's so many different routes, right?
Yeah.
You're right there. What should we... I actually don't know the specific answer for that, if we're talking about... Does anyone know that? Yeah, go on.
I think all of the above.
All of them.
All of the
Yeah.
above, but
Yeah.
you can certainly write to your MP. That is the most direct route into being heard. And actually, MPs do have to consult on everything that's brought up by the public if it becomes something that is a recurring theme. So that's the best you can do. But also, as well as writing, tweet, call, etc. That's how stuff gets done.
Yeah. Okay, good. Francois?
There's something interesting I was reading recently about if you want, as an individual, to have an impact, screw consumption, just look at where you're buying your electricity and where you're investing your lifetime savings. And saying actually,
Hopefully in my fund.
But
Thank you very much, Francois. Over and out.
There's obviously an aspect of obviously asking questions and stuff, but if you really want to make a massive difference, where you've got the most difference is the accumulation of savings you have through your lifetime. And if you just say you want them to be divested from oil, just that has a very significant impact. And the second thing is making sure that you buy renewable energy, because your carbon footprint annually is mostly linked to your energy consumption to heat your place and your water and your food. So just making those two things, in addition to obviously being activist if you've got time, but that is really. And then for the industry, I think there's something interesting to monitor in terms of workplace desirability, a movement that we're seeing at the moment where people are actually resigning from their job in mass and actually not necessarily showing up back in new job listing. And I think there's potentially an acceleration in terms of how desirable as an employer you really are. And part of that desirability is how much of a purpose and how much of a difference are you making. And so I think, and often when we talk also as an individual, there's a connection, but choose your workplace wisely. Just be very careful about where you work, because where you work and who's going to pay you makes a significant difference also in what you have. So be very careful about who you work for.
I think it's also a really key thing for successful companies going forward that they're starting to recognise is that if they want to get the top talent, the top brains, they are going to have to address this stuff. And actually, even if the people they're selling to didn't care, actually they're not going to get the great employees to develop their products, to develop their brands, if they don't pay this attention. And actually, that shift in great talents going to a select few brands, that will be a game changer, and brands will die if they don't change.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Well, there's hope right there. And we'll end it there. And I think that just as a stylist, my two things I'll say to the consumer and to the industry, well, mainly to the consumer is, I've been buying secondhand and charity shop clothing ever since I was 12. And don't be shy. Buy it online if you feel a bit icky about going to a charity shop or a secondhand store, but just embrace it and play dress up when you're in there. Take your friends with you. Take some of your favourite pieces with you, like take your favourite black trousers, your favourite blazer, whatever it is, some of the pieces that you feel safe in, and mix them up and play and play and play. And when you buy stuff, go and get it dry clean because it might have moths in it. And you don't want them because they'll ruin all your wardrobe. And embrace the seamstress. And there's a new company I've actually just discovered that I'm really excited about called The Seam, who are on Instagram, and they will send you a seamstress to your house, and it's all done through this kind of empowering this network of seamstresses and tailors. So if you're, a lot of people say to me, but where do I get someone to help me do my alterations? Don't worry about going to your dry cleaner if you don't trust them. I would recommend something like The Seam, or your dry cleaner if you can't be bothered to go online. But that's one thing that you should really be doing. And the other thing is, it's a cliche, but the old adage is the most sustainable thing is what's already in your wardrobe. That's the most sustainable fashion there is. It's either already in your, or it's out there in existence. So just buy secondhand again and again, or rent, but just try and avoid buying new unless you can really, really justify it and think about how long you're going to use it for. And with that, we'll say thank you very much to all our brilliant, brilliant panellists. Thank you all so much. Round of applause, please.
Thanks, Mary.
And thank you, Mary. And hopefully, I get to borrow those shoes. I think we're about the same size. You're giving me Sex in the City.
Yeah, and you know what? The other thing that's sustainable is what's in your friend's wardrobe.
I know.
Oh, yeah. And I can see that. Yeah.
This old thing.
I would look good in those shoes, right? I know.
You have the shoes, I'll have the dress.
Okay, boom.
That was a really poor high five.
All right.
Again.
Thank you all very much indeed again.